Something had changed inside me. Later that night, I stood in the bathroom brushing my hair. I looked at myself in the mirror. For years, I had avoided studying my reflection too closely. I knew every line, every gray hair, every sign of aging. But that night, I looked longer. I wondered when I had stopped feeling like a woman and started thinking of myself only as a wife. When had I stopped asking myself what I wanted? When had I decided that wanting anything beyond routine was selfish? I didn't know. And I didn't sleep much that night. Richard was lying beside me, breathing heavily. His breathing had become familiar over the decades. There was something comforting about it. Usually, that night it sounded different. I stared into the darkness. Daniel's question returned. Are you happy? I closed my eyes. I tried to answer. Nothing came. The next morning I woke before Richard. I went downstairs, made coffee, watered the plants, folded some laundry, packed Richard's lunch. He eventually came downstairs. He kissed my cheek. Morning. Morning. Busy day. I figured. He picked up his keys. I'll probably be late. Okay. Then he left. But this time the word wouldn't come. Instead, I felt something tighten in my chest. I don't know, I finally whispered. Daniel nodded. He didn't push. He didn't smile. He didn't take advantage of my hesitation. He simply said, "That's a complicated answer." I looked down at my hands. Maybe it's supposed to be. For the first time in years, someone had asked me a question I couldn't answer automatically. And that frightened me, because I knew what the honest answer might force me to confront. I reached for the door. I should go. Daniel nodded. Of course. I stepped out into the rain. Within seconds my hair was wet. My blouse began absorbing the cold water. I could have hurried toward the front door. Instead, I stood there for a moment. The rain fell against my face. It was cold, but strangely refreshing. I turned around. Daniel was still sitting in the car. Our eyes met through the rain-covered windshield. Neither of us waved. Neither of us smiled. Then I turned and walked inside. Richard came home about an hour later. He walked into the kitchen carrying his briefcase. Long day. I looked at him. Did you enjoy the luncheon? Yeah. He opened the refrigerator. Anything to eat? There's chicken. Great. That was it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing wrong. Just another evening. But something had changed. Not between Richard and me. Not yet. I hadn't realized how much I missed that feeling. Eventually he glanced over. You know something? What? You don't look invisible. I laughed nervously. That's funny. I'm serious. I've felt invisible for years. He looked at me for a moment before returning his attention to the road. Then maybe you've been surrounded by people who stopped looking. My heart skipped. I didn't know what to say. There are certain sentences that don't sound important when you first hear them, but later they become impossible to forget. That was one of them. We drove for several minutes in silence. Then Daniel turned onto a familiar street. I looked around. I recognized the neighborhood. You know where we live? He smiled. Richard and I have worked together for years. Right. I've dropped him off before. I nodded. I vaguely remembered him mentioning something about a baseball game years earlier. The rain was coming down hard now. Daniel pulled into our driveway. He put the car in park. But he didn't immediately turn off the engine. Thank you, I said. You're welcome. I reached for the door. Then he spoke. Evelyn. I stopped. Yes. Can I ask you something? I looked at him. You can tell me to mind my own business. I smiled. That's a dangerous way to start a question. He laughed. Then his expression changed. He became serious. Are you happy? I froze. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. What? Are you happy? There it was again. The question. Simple. Almost innocent. But it landed somewhere deep inside me. I stared at him. I could have said yes. It would have been easy. I had said yes thousands of times before. If someone asked me whether my marriage was good, I said yes. If someone asked whether Richard was a good husband, I said yes. If someone asked whether I was satisfied with my life, I said yes. There was no thunderclap. No sudden revelation. Just a tiny feeling. A feeling I couldn't immediately name. Because no one had said something like that to me in years. Maybe no one had ever said it. People depended on me. They thanked me. They expected me. But being appreciated was different from being seen. And Daniel had somehow managed to make me feel seen. I stared out the window. That's a strange thing to say. Why? Because I don't think of myself that way. How do you think of yourself? I laughed softly. At 61? He smiled. Age wasn't what I asked. I looked at him. He wasn't flirting. At least not obviously. He was simply curious. And somehow that made the conversation more dangerous. I turned back toward the windshield. I guess I don't think about myself very much anymore. Daniel was quiet. Then he said, maybe that's the problem. I didn't respond. The rain became heavier as we drove. The sound filled the car. For some reason I felt unusually comfortable. Maybe it was because Daniel didn't know my history. He didn't know what I had sacrificed. He didn't know how many times I'd put my own needs aside. He didn't know how many years I had spent trying to make everyone else happy. To him, I was simply a woman sitting beside him. Not someone's wife. Not someone's mother. Not someone's grandmother. Not the person who remembered appointments and birthdays. Just Evelyn. Of course. I looked outside. The first drops of rain had begun hitting the pavement. Within seconds, the rain became heavier. I sighed. All right. Daniel opened the passenger door for me. I climbed inside. The car smelled faintly of peppermint and leather. It was clean but not obsessively so. There were a few papers on the back seat and an empty coffee cup in the holder. Daniel started the engine. The radio was playing softly. He turned it down. For the first few moments, neither of us said anything. I watched the rain slide down the windshield. It was strangely peaceful. Then Daniel spoke. You really helped a lot today. I looked at him. What? At the office. Oh. I shrugged. I didn't do much. You did more than you think. I smiled politely. I'm just one of those people who can't stand watching everyone else work. Daniel laughed. I figured. There was a pause. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. That's what people like you do. I frowned slightly. People like me? He seemed to realize how that sounded. I didn't mean that badly. I didn't think you did. He kept his eyes on the road. I just mean, people like you are always helping. Always making sure everyone else is okay. I didn't answer. He continued. I don't think most people realize how much women like you hold together. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't dramatic. But I liked having something to do. I liked being useful. Richard was across the room talking to several coworkers. Every now and then he glanced in my direction and gave me a little nod. I smiled back. We had become experts at communicating without words. Maybe because there weren't that many words left to say. I didn't think about that at the time. I was too busy straightening things that didn't need straightening. After another 20 minutes, I decided I had done enough. I picked up my purse and headed toward the entrance. I figured I'd wait in the car until Richard was ready to leave. The clouds outside had become darker. I could hear distant thunder. I had just stepped through the doorway when I heard a voice behind me. Mrs. Harper? I turned. A man stood several feet away. I recognized him almost immediately. It was Daniel. He worked with Richard. I had seen him at a few company events over the years. He was probably in his mid-30s. Tall. Dark-haired. Usually wearing a slightly crooked smile. There was something casual about him. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. He wasn't constantly trying to impress people. He seemed to be the type who watched more than he spoke. Yes. He pointed toward the parking lot. Are you heading home? I was going to wait for Richard. Daniel glanced at the sky. You're going to get soaked. I laughed. I'll survive. He smiled. I'm serious. I parked near the front. I can drive you. I hesitated. It wasn't a big deal. It was just a ride. Still, something inside me said I should probably wait. Are you sure? He disappeared downstairs. I stayed in bed for another few minutes, staring at the ceiling. I didn't know it then, but that ordinary morning would be one of the last mornings when I could comfortably tell myself that I was completely satisfied with my life. That afternoon, Richard's company was holding a retirement luncheon for one of the senior employees. He had asked me earlier in the week if I could help with the setup. "They're short-handed," he'd said. "Do you mind?" Of course I didn't. I almost never did. Helping people had become one of the ways I measured my usefulness. If someone needed something, I tried to provide it. If there was work to be done, I did it. If someone was uncomfortable, I tried to make them comfortable. If there was an argument, I tried to calm it down. I had spent so many years being the person who held everything together that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without being needed. So I went. The company office was already busy when I arrived. Someone had hung silver balloons near the entrance. There were trays of sandwiches on long tables. Someone had arranged fruit into a large decorative bowl. A few employees were carrying boxes back and forth. There was music playing quietly in the background. The entire room had that strange feeling celebrations sometimes have. Everyone was smiling, but beneath the smiles was a little sadness. People were saying things like, "We're really going to miss you. You deserve retirement. Don't forget us." The guest of honor laughed and thanked everyone. I stood near the food table, arranging plates and napkins. It was nothing important. But that question followed me everywhere afterward. It followed me through my kitchen. It followed me into my bedroom. It sat beside me at breakfast. It waited for me when Richard kissed my cheek before leaving for work. And eventually, it forced me to look at a part of myself I had spent years pretending didn't exist. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because everything started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. And if someone had told me that morning that my entire understanding of my marriage was about to change, I would have laughed. I had no reason to suspect anything. I had no plan to question my life. I wasn't searching for another man. I wasn't looking for attention. And I certainly wasn't trying to cause trouble. At 61, I had become very good at avoiding trouble. I'd spent decades learning how to keep the peace. That was probably part of the problem. The Tuesday had started quietly. The sky was gray when I woke up, and a thin layer of clouds covered everything outside our bedroom window. Richard was already awake. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling on his shoes. "You sleeping?" he asked. "Apparently not," I replied. He smiled faintly. That was how most of our conversations had become over the years. Short, practical, predictable. There was nothing wrong with him. That was something I kept reminding myself. Richard wasn't cruel. He wasn't irresponsible. He wasn't a bad husband. He paid the bills. He remembered birthdays. He helped when something around the house broke. He had never given me a reason to believe he didn't care about me. But somewhere along the way, caring and connecting had become two different things. I didn't understand that yet. Not fully. Richard kissed my cheek before leaving the room. "I'll see you later." Okay. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications, because if you enjoy emotional relationship stories filled with unexpected twists, difficult choices, and moments that make you look at your own life differently, you definitely won't want to miss what happens next. My name is Evelyn, and I was 61 years old when I learned something I wish I had understood much earlier in life. Sometimes the most dangerous question isn't the one that exposes a secret. Sometimes, it's the one that forces you to admit a truth you've been avoiding for years. For almost 40 years I had been married to the same man. His name was Richard. We had built a life together from almost nothing. We had shared holidays, illnesses, birthdays, family arguments, financial problems, celebrations, disappointments, and all the ordinary little moments that slowly become the foundation of a marriage. For most of my adult life, I believed that was what happiness looked like. Not excitement. Not grand romantic gestures. Not the kind of love people wrote songs about. Just stability. A familiar house. A husband who came home every night. A kitchen that needed cleaning. Bills that needed paying. Family photographs hanging on the walls. A comfortable routine. I used to think that if nothing was terribly wrong, then everything must be right. I was wrong. And I didn't realize how wrong I was until a man I barely knew asked me one simple question. "Are you happy?" It sounds harmless, doesn't it? Almost too simple to matter.